Ray Dalio founded his investing firm Bridgewater in 1975 out of his apartment. Today, it's the world's largest hedge fund with over $160 billion under management, and in my personal opinion, Ray Dalio is in the top 3 greatest investors of all time. What I want to do in this video is go over the stock portfolio of Ray Dalio's investing firm, Bridgewater. With over 40 years of high-level investing history, what are the stocks that Ray Dalio now owns to prepare himself for the future? Let's dig deeper into Ray Dalio's portfolio. Okay, let's get straight into Ray Dalio's number 1 investment, which is the Vanguard FTSE Emerging Market ETF. It's under the ticker symbol VWO. So this particular investment, Ray Dalio has 47.5 thousand shares in. It's worth just over $2 billion, and it makes up 15.9% of his portfolio at Bridgewater. So what the heck is VWO? VWO is an emerging market ETF. So basically what this means is if you own this particular ETF, you're going to own stocks in a bunch of emerging markets. The particular emerging markets that VWO is in includes China, Brazil, Taiwan, and South Africa. It's a pretty interesting mix of countries there, I'm not going to lie. So this particular ETF has a lot of potential growth. Just think about how businesses can grow in those countries that have not been fully developed yet. But I will say this, they obviously have more risk. They're nowhere near as stable as the United States. Over the last 10 years, this particular ETF hasn't done that great for Dalio. It's achieved him a 5.56% return. Anyway, let's move on to Dalio's next investment, which is the opposite of this particular ETF. So the second largest position is something called the SPDR S&P 500 ETF. Anyone who has studied Dalio will know that he loves ETFs. Yes, in this portfolio he does have individual stock picks. We'll get to that at the end, but his largest positions are ETFs. So this particular ETF is called the SPDR S&P 500 ETF. Bridgewater has almost $2 billion worth of this ETF, and it makes up 15.6% of his total portfolio. Now, those who follow the stock markets will know what this ETF is about. Basically, what this ETF does is it tracks US large and mid-cap stocks selected by the S&P committee. So basically, it tracks something called the S&P 500 large and well-known stocks throughout the United States. It's the best known indicator for the overall US market. So, that's quite interesting. About 1/3 of Dalio's portfolio is in either an emerging markets ETF or a United States ETF. So, straight away, Dalio is extremely well diversified throughout both stocks and countries. But Dalio's 3rd and 4th largest positions are going to show you which out of these 2 markets he prefers. Okay, these next 2 investments are basically the same thing. They come under the ticker symbol IEMG and EEM, and they are both ETFs that track emerging markets. IEMG seeks to track the investment results of an index composed of large, mid, and small capitalization emerging market equities. And when you look at EEM, it literally does the exact same thing as IEMG, but it does not track the small cap stocks. It only tracks the large and mid cap stocks. So if you take a look at some of the companies that are owned in this ETF, we've got the likes of Tencent and Alibaba, and those are the 2 major positions. You've also got Taiwan Semiconductors and Samsung. You've got Naspers, that's a big company in South Africa. Reliance Industries from India. You've got a pretty interesting mix throughout countries. But Dalio has a lot of his stock exposed to those emerging markets. So honestly, I don't have that much to say on this particular ETF. It's a core S&P 500 ETF. It's pretty much the same as Dalio's investment number 2, which I have already explained. iShares Core S&P 500 makes up 5.1% of Bridgewater's total stock positions. However, Dalio's next position is very interesting. So the sixth largest position in Dalio's stock portfolio is the SPDR Gold Trust, ticker symbol GLD. Dalio, he's got $540 million worth of stock in GLD through his investment fund Bridgewater, and in total, it makes up 4.2% of his portfolio. So what is this SPDR Gold Trust? Okay, SPDR Gold Shares is actually the largest physically backed gold exchange traded fund in the world. So it's giving investors a cheap, easy, and secure way of exposing their portfolio to gold. So yeah, the expense ratio is pretty low at 0.4%. It's got $41.5 billion of assets under management, and the exposure type is physically held. So they own physically held gold. The question now becomes, why does Dalio own gold? Isn't gold just something that sits there and, looks pretty? Not exactly. So Ray Dalio actually owns gold for two reasons. One is as a store of value, and two, as a form of portfolio diversification. Dalio, he says this. He says we have a situation now where when you have too much debt leads to the printing of money to make it easier to service. So all of those things mean that some portion of your investment should be in gold. Dalio famously quoted that if you don't own gold, you know neither history nor economics. He says that it is prudent to have 5 to 10% of your portfolio in gold, and that is why he has a pretty substantial position in this gold ETF. And his 15th largest position is also in a gold ETF, even further exposing his portfolio to gold. This is a fascinating position owned by Ray Dalio's Bridgewater. It's a Brazil ETF, which Dalio has $412 million in. It's not a menial position. Basically, what this ETF is used for is to track the overall Brazil market. It gives you exposure to large and mid-cap companies in Brazil. Since inception, it's performed okay for Ray Dalio. It's helped him achieve a 7.16% return. But over the past year, this index has done really well for Ray Dalio. It got him a 39% return. So, maybe things with this particular ETF will continue to pick up in the future. I find it very interesting why Bridgewater likes Brazil so much. In fact, it was said in a letter to clients recently that Brazil should be on the path to recovery and that Brazil's economic growth could be the strongest in the world in 2020. So, if you're looking for an investment with high potential growth, I personally would look deeper into the Brazil situation. The reason why I group these next three investments together is because they are all bonds. So LQD is an investment grade corporate bond ETF that makes up 2.6% of the portfolio. Then you've got HYG, high yield corporate bond, coming in at 2.2% of the portfolio. And lastly, you've got TLT, which is a 20 plus year treasury bond at 2.1% of the portfolio. And for those who don't know what a bond is, basically what you're doing here is you're just loaning money to someone. It could be a government that you loan to or a business, etc. And in return, they will pay you the investment back at a later date. And of course, you'll get paid interest on top of that. So obviously with the bonds that Dalio owns, he owns two corporate bonds, which essentially means he's loaned money to a group of corporations, and he's got a government bond, loaning money to the government. He'll obviously get interest from these bonds, and generally speaking, bonds are known as a more safe investment to have. Let's keep going though, because we've got one more ETF to go through, and then what I'm going to do is show you the key individual stocks that Dalio owns. I don't know what's more interesting, the Brazil ETF owned by Dalio or the South Korean one. Dalio's Bridgewater has $213 million worth of the South Korean ETF, and it comes in at 1.7% of his portfolio. So what is the objective of this EWY ETF? Basically what it does is it tracks the investment results of an index composed of South Korean equities. It's targeted at large and mid-cap equities to express a single country view, obviously, of South Korea. Again, this has been an average performer for Dalio. It's helped him achieve a 6.9% return with this particular ETF. But over the past year, South Korea has performed pretty bad. It's gone down by 10.3%. Anyway, what I now need to do is talk to you guys about the major individual stocks owned by Ray Dalio's investment firm, Bridgewater. One of Dalio's biggest stock positions is a stock I'm sure you would have heard of before. It's called Alibaba. Alibaba, it's obviously the Chinese e-commerce company, but they do more than just e-commerce. They've got their payment systems. They've got a range of business models throughout China and actually throughout Asia as well. Alibaba, at the time of making this video, sells for a price of $166 with earnings of $3.50, giving it a reasonably high PE ratio of 47.5. It's a little bit high, but as their earnings increase, that PE ratio will go down. So Dalio's Bridgewater has 313,000 shares of Alibaba, equating to $53.2 million in the stock. He's also exposed his portfolio to the likes of the Royal Bank of Canada, which is the largest bank in Canada. This particular bank, it pays a really nice dividend of 4.3%, that's the yield, and it's got a low PE ratio as well of 11.2. Fascinating stock to look deeper into. Another very interesting position of Dalio is Berkshire Hathaway stock, which is obviously the investment company run by the greatest investor of all time, Warren Buffett. Obviously, for those who have followed the channel for a while, will know that I have a video course on exactly how Warren Buffett invests in stocks, so the link to that is in the description if you guys are interested. I think Dalio knows that as soon as you buy Berkshire, you're immediately exposed to some of the greatest businesses of all time. So it's not a bad stock at all to expose your portfolio to. But you know, Dalio, he owns a bunch more interesting stocks as well, not just Berkshire, not just Alibaba. He owns a range. He's got the likes of Google, IBM, Coca-Cola. We can't get into them all in this video, unfortunately, but that is something I would recommend you guys to Google and look deeper into. And this is one of the things that I do with my personal portfolio. I take deep looks into what other experts like Dalio and Warren Buffett, etc. are buying, and then I see if it fits in with my personal portfolio and my investment strategy. I just think it's a smarter way to invest, to screen your stocks through experts before you actually buy them. So if you do want to see my portfolio, the link to that is also in the description. But you know, Dalio, for me, he comes under my top 3 greatest investors of all time. Also remember that in his portfolio, he may own, you know, certain treasuries and certain cash positions that he does not have to expose to the public. But these ones that I've just shown you are his major stock investments that he does have to publicly disclose. They're very interesting to learn from, especially in these shaky market conditions that we are in today. And we all know that Dalio is the one who thrives in tough market conditions.